YouTube, welcome back. I have quite an important topic to discuss today, and that is compound interest. I'm sure that most of us have heard this phrase before, but I wonder how many of us actually understand this concept fundamentally. So I wanted to break that down in my video today so we can start to have a better understanding of what it is. So, simply put, compound interest is just interest on interest. I know that sounds a little confusing, so I'm going to break down a little illustration here just so we can see an example. So let's say in a traditional interest bearing account, I start with $5. I'm only ever going to make interest off of that $5 at a time. So maybe I'll make $1, let's say, in interest. I'm only ever going to make $1 at a time. So my account will go up from 5 to 6, 7, 8, etc. So you can see how that goes up linearly, whereas compound interest is much different. If I start with that same example and add $1 to my $5 that I start with, now I'm actually making interest on $6 rather than $5 like I was in a traditional interest account. So you can see how over time, since we're getting interest on a larger amount each time, that number is going to go up exponentially. So I know that sounds a little confusing. I'd love to dive into some charts and data here so you can actually see it. So let's jump right into that. So I wanted to talk about the difference between compound interest and traditional interest and showing the differences in charts and data so we can actually visualize the differences here. So if I were to start with a $20,000 principal, basically just starting with $20,000 in an account, assuming that it grows at 8% per year. If we look at that account in 10 years' time with a traditional amount of interest, we're going to get $16,000 total. That's $1,600 per year at 8% of this 20,000 for that total of $16,000 in 10 years. So that plus the $20,000 that we started with gets us to $36,000 total. And we'll see as we look at our compound interest here in a second with the exact same 10 years at 8%, we're going to have $43,000 in our account. So we might be thinking, like, okay, that's a little bit more than the traditional interest, but I don't really see a big difference here. And that's because the very important thing that helps compound interest is time. So the longer we have for our interest to grow, the more exponential the growth occurs. So if we do this exact same thing, but over a 30-year period, you'll see how much different it is. So same inputs here, that $20,000 we start with at 8% per year for 30 years, we're going to have $48,000 in traditional interest, $1,600 a year again, but for 30 years. So $48,000 of interest plus the original 20, we are at $68,000 total in this traditional account, traditional interest over 30 years. Now, would anyone like to guess where we will be with compound interest accounts in a 30-year period? Over $200,000. So it is a substantial jump because we have allowed time to uh, really exponentially grow the account for compounding to do its magic. So if we were to look at this on a graph here so you can really see what's happening. Remember, we have not, in either of these examples, put a single dollar into the account aside from that original $20,000 that we started with. That's why our contribution here is at $20,000 and hasn't moved at all. We haven't put any extra money in there. And you'll notice that at about 10 years, that's our first example, we were just over $40,000 here, and it was very similar to the traditional interest. But as we saw with letting time compound, that's when you're going to see this chart just grow dramatically. And once we get to that 30-year period, that's how we were over that $200,000 mark. And you can imagine how much farther it would continue to spike here if we let it continue to grow over those past 30 years. So one other example I'd like to give is, well, what happens if instead we start with $0? So rather than $20,000, I just start and open an account today with nothing in it. And all I do is put in $100 every month. That's it, just $100. Same amount of time for 30 years at that 8% interest rate in a compound bearing account. I would still have $135 or $135,000 in this account. So what we've seen in this example here is it doesn't really matter if I start with a lot of money and put nothing in it, or I start with no money and put just a little bit every single month. The magic thing to let compounding work is time. So the longer that I let it sit there and grow, that's when I'm going to have these dramatic amounts get added into my account by that interest building on top of itself day after day, week after week, and month after month. Okay, so at this point, you may be thinking, yeah, that sounds terrific. I would love to put my money into an account where I don't even have to think about it and I just get to watch it grow exponentially. But what account is that? Where do I even get started? So, in previous videos, I have talked about simple accounts such as a checking account, maybe a high yield savings account, and those are great accounts for their own domains. But I'm going to post my next video about a more advanced account where you can start to leverage compound interest yourself. So stick with me for next week when I dive into the Roth IRA and we get a little bit more advanced with how we can use this account for compound interest as well as other tax advantages as well. See you then.